I'm going to tell you a little bit about the 4 agreements and don't make assumptions. So Don Miguel Ruiz says in this book, how to eradicate assumptions is by asking, and asking the bolder questions, right? So if we ask a question, we eradicate all assumptions. I mean, isn't that immaculate? And he says there's 2 ways to do it. To ask the bolder questions is one way. And then the other one is to find your voice and ask for what you want. And he says now, you know, be sure to know that you're not going to get it all the time, but at least you've asked for it. And that other person has the right to say yes or no. But also, if somebody asks you a question or, for something, you also have the ability to say yes or no. So moving into eradicating assumptions really requires that we empower our own voice and our ability to really speak our truth and ask for what we want. So I had this lesson early when I was a kid, because I remember I wanted to be an actress, you know? And I was sure about it, but nobody in my neighborhood was an actor, you know? Everybody was like blue collar, you know, nurses and electricians. My dad was an electrician, but he did happen to have one friend of his, Mr. Larkin, who was an actor. He was also an electrician, but he was also an actor. And every once in a while, we'd see Mr. Larkin on TV. You know, he'd be like the doorman for like, you know, in a soap opera, or he'd be like the Irish cop in like a commercial. And we'd be like, Mr. Larkin, you know him, you know? And the funniest thing is that his stage name was Mickey Muldoon. And so I was like, oh, you know, my actual last name is Muldoon only because I took it. It's my grandmother's last name. So at the time I was Maureen Pearson. If I was living in Jersey City where my cousins live, I'd be Maureen Pearson. The Pearson family. But where I lived, that was Maureen. So anyway, it wasn't until later that I took Maureen Muldoon, but Mickey Muldoon, he was the only actor I knew, Mr. Larkin, and I told my dad, like, you know, hook me up, and my dad said, okay, you know Mr. Larkin, so ask him what to do. So one day we were at the church, and Mr. Larkin was sitting there with my dad, and I was like, this is my in, you know, I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to like figure out how to be an actor. And I see the 2 guys sitting there, and I come up to the table, and I sit down, I'm like, hey, Dad, you know, I'm like, Mr. Larkin's there, you know, and I'm like, hey, Mr. Larkin, you know, my dad probably wants to ask you something, and I'm looking at my dad's looking at me like I'm a moron, and I'm like, come on, Dad, like, make the deal, like, say the thing, you know, and I'm sitting there sweating it, right, like, this is the only chance I'm ever going to have, you know, to get some wisdom on how to be an actor. And nothing happens. They're talking about electricity. And I'm like, ah! It's like killing me. So I get home in the van on the way home. I say to my dad, like, Dad, what happened? You're supposed to say to Mr. Larkin. And he's like, Maureen, if you want that, you got to ask for it. And I was like, damn. You know? So he gave me Mr. Larkin's phone number, but I was like a kid, and Mr. Larkin was an adult. And I'm like, I gotta call Mr. Larkin? This is so awkward. And I gotta admit that I wanna be an actor? How embarrassing. What if he says, no, you're just a kid, you can't do it? What if he says there's special handshakes or things that I don't know about, you know? You know? And so it was really nerve-wracking to make that phone call. You've had to make this phone call before. It's so scary. Sometimes the phone feels like £1,000,000, you know? Sometimes we do it to move ourselves forward. Sometimes we do it to get ourselves out of a rut. But that phone, man, sometimes it can be the furthest thing from our reach. And today we carry them with us, so that's ridiculous, right? So I finally make the phone call to Mr. Larkin. My heart's pounding, my knees are shaking, and I gotta say, I want to be an actor. I'm just like, and I'm waiting for him just to be like, don't be so bold, and who do you think you are, and all of these other things that I've sort of been immersed in my whole life. And he says, okay, meet me down at the train station tomorrow morning. And I'm like, what? What? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm going to go on an audition, you're going to run the lines with me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm running lines. What does that mean, So I'm like, okay, I'll be there. So I go down to the train station the next morning, I see Mr. Larkin there. And he gives me the script, and we get on the train together, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm reading the lines, and it's scary to read the lines for the first time out loud, you know? And I'm sitting across from him on the train, and we're both sitting there, and I'm like, I'm sitting on the train with Mr. Larkin, who's been on TV. And we read these little vignettes, and there's these little scenes between these two older couples, you know, talking about how they met. So they're really easy little scenes to read. And I remember thinking, I am on a train with a real live actor, with a real live script, going to a real live audition. And I felt so real and so alive because I had moved past my fears and my assumptions to cause that to happen. And I remember that the movie, I don't know if it got made or not, it was this funny little movie. The title was When Harry Met Sally. Remember that? Yeah, isn't that funny? So every time I see those little vignettes of, you know, what are you doing after? I was like, I read for that. I didn't actually read it. I just practiced on the, Mr. Larkin didn't get a part either, so. But it was very interesting to be in that space where I got to see where my voice could carve out my life. You know, and if I closed off my voice, I could sit in the stagnations of my assumptions and never get anywhere. So it was just the beginning for me to see how I had a power within me that could make a difference if I moved past my fears. And this is what Don Miguel says about assumptions, you know? And this is what, actually, I feel like this one agreement is something that's in my bones. I've been teaching it in everything, right? You know, we teach it here at Voice Box. We say, what do you think? What do you have to say? We say that at SpeakEasy. What do you think? What do you have to say? We'll have a conversation after this. You know, we say it at Miracles Live 365 on the call every single day. I make space for you to find your voice. Because the thing is, if we don't do that, we create alternative altars. You know, the guy at the top where you get what you get and you don't get upset and you're just supposed to absorb it without question. That will create sheeps. And we're not sheeps, we're creators. We're not conformers, we're creators. So in order to move into your creativity, you begin by opening up that throat chakra and seeing what's there. And when you turn on that throat chakra, it might come out first as rusty water, you know, but eventually as you get used to your own power, you'll find yourself saying things like, wow, I'm really smart. You know? I mean, it might take a little while, but for me it took a couple years. Only thing that came out of my mouth was just a lot of rusty water and tears, because I was shut down. I had no problem saying other people's scripts, but finding my own truth, you know, if you feel nervous around that, just know it's natural. That's natural to be nervous around finding your own truth, you know? You're kind of dancing, navigating a new dance, and sometimes it can be awkward, especially when we're immersed in these assumptions, which are just unquestioned pockets in our lives that we just have never held the light up to. So the idea about assumptions is they come from a place of fearing to be intimate with you, because if I ask you a question, then we're going to get intimate, you know? If I sit on my side of the stage and I just make up stuff about you, we don't have to ever interact at all. It's kind of working for my ego anyhow. So it requires that we get intimate with each other. It also requires that we give up control. As long as I'm on the other side of the court, I can make up all kinds of things about you and I can be right. But if I meld it with what you think, all of a sudden, maybe I'm wrong. And you know something? God bless you when you're wrong. It means that you're learning something new. You know, we're so afraid of being wrong. I remember, if you remember Happy Days with Fonzarelli, he couldn't say I'm wrong. It was so funny. I was just watching it the other day, but he would say, you know, I made it, you know, maybe I was, and then he'd say, so I'm kind of, I think maybe I'm sorry. He would say, I'm sorry either. And there's this, like, you can watch it on Google. I'll put it on our Facebook page, but there's this whole stream of these little scenes where he's saying, I was I'm wrong a good amount of the time. Once I can deal with that, I can have grace around it. Oh my God, my husband just gave me the high five like this. I'm never wrong when it comes to my husband. Anyhow, so the assumptions, the funny assumptions that we take out, some of them are universal. So like if we see somebody has a ring on their finger, we assume they're married. Somebody doesn't have a ring on their finger, we assume they're not. Somebody has throat cancer, we assume probably was a smoker. If somebody, if for police officers and for doctors, we assume that they're right. For car salesmen and lawyers, we assume that they're not. And we're laughing because it's true. We have these kind of unchecked assumptions that we just roll with without ever being present enough to say, I'm not going to define you by my last assumptions of what this title means. I'm going to be right here with you now. And if you hold the space for that, you will see miracles. We assume because we're in a liberal church that everyone thinks exactly like we do. That's a blind spot, We are Democratic, we are Republican, we are a tapestry of people here. And it gets us into trouble, if we assume that, because we'll say, yeah, we honor all paths, but we're assuming you're going to go on ours. And if you don't, we're like, you hear that? Yeah. Yeah, like Spinella, if you know what I mean. We're chocolate eaters here. It's okay. We're human. But let's not pretend that we're superhuman, because we're just human. We're beautifully human in all of our imperfections. And sometimes we're wrong. Gosh, it's kind of refreshing to admit that. We assume if we have a lump, what do we assume? Cancer. And if we have cancer, we assume we're going to die, So we better rush off to the hospital and buy our tombstone. But it's funny because when we're driving and we see somebody rushing, we don't assume they have a lump or cancer. We assume they're an asshole. Isn't that crazy? Gosh, we assume that we have enough time, and we always hit traffic. And then we assume when someone else shows up late, we assume, well, they don't care as much about this meeting as we do. We assume that homeless people are drug addicts. That breaks my heart a little bit. Because we keep people in boxes, and we have no idea. We assume young people are lazy, old people are crabby, gay people are artsy. And they love their musicals. But still, it's a generalization, Blonde people are not as bright, rich people are kind of greedy, and redheads are awesome. That last one is kind of true, though. Don't take my word for it, though. Try it out. You'll find the truth in it for you. When we assume things, when we have our assumptions, we have these unquestioned areas. And when we start to get these areas dismantled by the truth, by questioning the situation, we get our minds blown, because assumptions are made from a closed mind, and they're almost like a minefield for blind spots. That's what they are. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I always thought this was a really interesting scenario about assumptions. When I was little, there was that riddle that went around. This father and this son are driving, and they get into this car accident, right? And the father's killed on instant, and the son gets rushed to the hospital. He needs an operation really fast so that he can have his life saved. And the doors of the hospital building, slide open, and the doctor walks out, and the doctor looks down at the child, and the doctor says, "I can't operate on this child. This is my son." And the kid next to you would always be like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, two dads? No. Stepdad? No. Grandfather? No. And then it was the mother. The mother's a doctor? How could a mother be a doctor? We've never seen a woman doctor before, up to that point, you know? So that was a mind blow, you know, and you went away feeling kind of stupid. It's good to have your mind blown a little bit, you know? The time we assumed that doctors were only women, and now, you know, even in the reverse, that nurses are only, that doctors are only men and nurses are only women. I remember the first time a male friend of mine said that he was a nurse, I literally had to suppress a giggle. I was like, a nurse! So embarrassing. I was wrong, you know? But, you know, when you come up against something that you didn't know, you're either gonna like laugh. When you get your mind blown, you kind of giggle. You go, wow, I was wrong. You know, what else don't I know? So, yeah, and my sister was with me. She was giggling also. Nurse. I remember when I ran a triathlon with my husband. We trained and trained and trained. And I remember thinking, because I'm young and fit, I'm going to blow past all these people, right? Oh man, it was wrong. I was wrong, man. There were people in all shapes and sizes, all ages. This 73-year-old woman passed me like I was standing still. And I was like, damn, I was wrong. Wow, awesome. Awesome to be wrong, you know? So the idea is not to assume anything, you know? Don't assume that you know everything. Don't assume some of the other assumptions that we could maybe annihilate. Don't assume that everyone has to like you. Don't assume that nobody likes you. You know, don't assume that everything you read is true. Don't assume that everything you think is true. You know, don't assume that change takes time. Don't assume that nothing ever changes. Don't assume that when you give of yourself, you lose something. Don't assume that you can know people by the way they talk or walk or look. I had this one scenario. One day I said, God, I want you to bring me a cup of coffee. You know, I'm a little weird. I do these tricks on myself. And I show up at work and this guy came up to me and said, hey, Maureen, can I buy you a cup of coffee? And I told the story before and I was like, no. No, I don't need a cup of coffee. Because he was the janitor. And I thought, well, the janitor probably doesn't have enough money to buy me a cup of coffee. He was the richer of us, the two of us, because I wasn't even willing to buy myself a cup of coffee. I was wrong. And as he walked away, I realized that I was wrong. And I got an opportunity to try again. God always gives us an opportunity to try again. He came back, he said, do you want a tamale? And I was like, yeah, I do. So it's just so interesting, the sad little assumptions we make of each other, you know? You know, we just do not know. A man could be wearing the finest clothes in the world and driving a Maserati. He could be broke as broke. A man could walk in with flip-flops and a t-shirt. He could be a billionaire. And I've seen it happen. So let's be wrong sometimes. Don't assume don't assume that it's going to be hard, because it could be easy. And conversely, don't assume that it's going to be easy, because sometimes it'll be a little hard, you know? So just come open to it. Don't assume that it's too late for you. Don't assume that it's too soon for you. Don't assume that you can't try again. Don't assume that your story isn't important. Don't assume that your voice doesn't matter. Don't assume that they will say no. Don't assume that your family knows how much you love them. Don't assume that. Don't assume, this is my favorite one, because I learned it the hard way. Don't assume that the ice is thick enough to walk on. I had one of those Jimmy Stewart moments. Anyhow. So here's one of the assumptions that I have at SpeakEasy. I have this assumption that you just want to come and hang out and not actually join a team or be really immersed or committed to creating this experience. I assume that. And so I walk on eggshells like, does anybody want to set up the coffee? We've had the same 4 or 5 people setting up the coffee the whole last year. And they love doing it. But, you know, I assume that it's working, you know. So I called one of the people last night just to see how she was doing, and turns out not working. So I said, well, let's think of some ways that we can make it work. And one of the ways we came up with was, I said, how about if we had 2 families a month help that team? Well, that's easy to do. They do it at other churches where people come and say, oh, in February I'll bring the snacks and I'm going to do it with Joan, and hey, maybe in February you and I can vision on it and we'll bring heart-centered foods. Like, that would be fun. Like, it doesn't have to be a stress. It could be something creative. And so I said, yeah, we'll get 2 families to show up. And she said, hold up. When you say 2 families, you assume that everybody comes as a family, and I don't. And I was like, oh man, I'm wrong again. I spent my day being wrong. I was like, thank you so much for saying that. It's just so amazing how we just continue to move from our little limited ideas, and we just continue to regurgitate what was. When we have to kind of hold each other impeccable to our words, that's the first agreement. So I'm actually going to send around a little sign up today. She's going to come and talk next week, Bonnie, who's awesome, about how much she loves her job, her volunteer thing here. And I just put February, March, and April, and I'll send it around in a little while if you feel called to put your name on there, because I'm not going to assume that you wouldn't get a kick out of being back in the kitchen and making coffee with the likes of Dave Ham. who is a rock star, I hear, around campus.
Do you have enough lines on that sign-up sheet?
Yeah, I know. It's going to get filled up. So that's just one of my assumptions. I want to tell you a story that I really love. It's one of my favorite Bible stories. If you're new here, I don't always talk from the Bible. My book is Course in Miracles. That's my backbone. 12-step is my springboard. We try and honor all paths here. This is a story from the Bible, which I think is really interesting because it blew some assumptions for me. It's the story about Jesus and the adulteress, right? And he's out at a temple, he's preaching, and he's a teacher of love, and he's out early in the morning, he comes to the temple, and these teachers of the law come to him with an adulterous lady, and they say to him, hey, Jesus, we got ourselves an adulteress. And they say, and according to Moses' law, we got to stone her. So what do you think? Can we get the green light on that? Now, when I read this story and heard the story, maybe this happened to you too when you were little, like we thought like, wow, Jesus is literally between a rock and a hard place, no pun intended. Because if he says, yeah, go stone her, he's going against his own gospel that says love your neighbor as yourself. And if he says don't stone her, he's breaking the law. So what's going to happen, right? And Jesus does this interesting thing in this story. He stoops down and he starts drawing in the dirt. What the hell? But it says in the Bible that he didn't pay any mind to those people who kept asking him, what you going to do, what you going to do, what you going to do. He just continued to he took his time, and I think that was the moment where he just said, let me be still. Let me tap in and do what I need to do. Let me turn away from the logic of the world so I can turn into the intelligence of the divine, which goes beyond, what I'm being offered on the limited menu of the world. So when he gets up, when he looks up, he doesn't say, yeah, stone her. And he doesn't say, no, don't stone her. He gives them an answer that blows their mind, blew my mind. He says to them, hey, how about this? Whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. And it's like, oh man, that was a good answer. I'm so glad he didn't choose from the limited menu, What would have happened if he did, but he didn't? But sometimes we do, don't we? We choose from a limited menu. We feel between a rock and a hard place. And we're just like, oh God, out of fear, I'm just going to make a choice. Instead of getting still, listening to that internal teacher and saying, what would be another answer here? Because God's not limited to this or that. God has a million answers. So he comes up with this answer, and it says, from the oldest to the last, they begin to leave convicted by their own consciousness. He didn't judge them. They judged themselves. And they said, okay, I can't do that because I know the truth and everyone's going to call me out. you know. And then he sits there a little longer. And the adulterous lady's still there. Now the only two of them are left. And he looks up and he says, hey, where's all your accusers? And she says, they left. And he says, well, I don't accuse you of anything. Go and sin no more. And when we think about sin, we think about just missing the mark, man. You just missed the mark. Maybe you didn't show up to the bolder version of yourself. Maybe you forgot to ask the questions that you were entitled to ask, you know? Why do I only get to have one husband? I don't know. Could be a good answer question. I never asked that one, but I didn't. I had two husbands. My second one is awesome. Trophy husband in the house. Sorry, baby. I love you. So we got that story. We get that beautiful teaching, right? And we didn't see it coming. You know, we didn't see this other possibility coming. And it's funny because why didn't we see it coming? Because we are addicted to assuming the worst. You know, it's okay. It's just kind of what we swim in. We assume the worst. Yesterday we went down to the march. It turned out to be beautiful. But the assumptions that led us to that train station, at least in my shoes, I was like, okay, who knows what's going to happen? I show up there. You know, Letty, you were in Washington. And I show up there to this little circle of women. And you got some young girls there. And they're like, I hope nobody has a gun. I was like, ah, man, you had to say that? And then somebody else said, I keep thinking something's going to go wrong. And I hate to think that, but I thought it 4 times so far this morning. I was like, well, could you stop thinking that? But you know, many of us here have a spiritual practice where we get up in the morning and we train our brain to stay in line with what we really want. And if you don't train your brain to stay in line with what you really want, you're going to be more susceptible to the current events. You're going to be pulled around left and right, you know? So you got to do that spiritual practice before you get to the sticky station. So anyway, we're assuming the worst, but then we get on the train. The train was beautiful. We got seats right by the bathroom. We get on out there and we get on this beautiful day. You know, gorgeous. It was so gorgeous that Joan said, oh, a day like this, you got to know that God is a woman. And somebody said, you know, well, why would you assume that just because the day is beautiful that God's a woman? And I said, well, we've been assuming that God's a man all along. Now, we don't have anything against God being a man. I love men. But it's just something that we assume, you know. It's just opening up the little mind a bit. You know, being a good teacher of God requires that we come with an open mind. And then we get to laugh at the little places that we have confined God to just this or just that. So the questions that we want to bring up today are... how can I come with an open mind to all that is? You know, where can I give up assuming the worst? Like literally think in your Rolodex, like where can I give that up? Like what's that getting me? Where can I practice assuming the best? Where can I let go of fear and control and the need to be right? You know, instead, where can I assume love? And where can I ask the bolder question? Where are those bold questions sitting on the back burner? The ones that are going to make your knees rattle and your heart pound. Where are those questions? Can we shake them off and dust them off and move them out into consciousness? Because I know, as sure as I know anything, that everything that's good and beautiful and holy comes from us creating. And we cannot create from assumptions. We can only make things up from assumptions. And you were here to create. So that's the word. Yay! Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more tips and tools on how to be a spiritual vixen, go on over to my website, MaureenMuldoon.com, and you can sign up for my love notes. Until then, I'm Maureen Muldoon, the spiritual vixen, reminding you to love more, fear less, and don't forget to laugh.